Behind the iconic chrome armor and deadpan delivery of Dead or Alive, You're Coming With Me lies a production filled with bizarre incidents, creative conflicts, and unexpected challenges that nearly derailed this sci-fi masterpiece. From a director who literally threw the script in the trash to a star who demanded Oreos while staying in character, the making of Paul Verhoeven's dystopian thriller was almost as chaotic as the crime-ridden Detroit it portrayed. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about RoboCop 1987. Fact 1. Director threw script away on beach. One of cinema's most beloved sci-fi action films almost never happened because its director literally threw the script in the trash while on vacation. Paul Verhoeven, the Dutch filmmaker who would eventually bring RoboCop to life, was relaxing on a beach in the south of France during the summer of 1986 when he received the screenplay from his agent. After skimming through just the first 20 pages, Verhoeven became convinced he was reading what he later called a piece of shit and completely ridiculous American nonsense, so he tossed the entire script into a nearby garbage bin and went for a swim. When Verhoeven returned from his dip in the Mediterranean, he discovered his wife Martine had rescued the discarded pages and was quietly reading through them. Still dripping wet and annoyed that she had bothered with what he considered trash, Verhoeven told her bluntly that the script was worthless. But Martine had a completely different perspective on the story of a murdered police officer transformed into a cyborg law enforcer, and she urged her husband to give it another chance. She believed the material had genuine potential for him to create something different and interesting, despite its seemingly simple premise about a robotic cop fighting crime in a dystopian Detroit. Reluctantly following his wife's advice, Verhoeven sat down and read the entire screenplay more carefully this time. What he had initially dismissed as a mindless action movie suddenly revealed itself to be a sharp satire of American corporate culture, media manipulation, and urban decay. The script's blend of ultra-violence and social commentary perfectly matched Verhoeven's own filmmaking sensibilities, and he realized that beneath the surface-level robot action story lay a sophisticated critique of 1980s American society. Within days of that beach revelation, Verhoeven committed to directing the film that would become his first major Hollywood success and establish him as a master of satirical science fiction cinema. Fact 2. Arnold Schwarzenegger, rejected for being too big. Arnold Schwarzenegger was seriously considered to play the lead role in RoboCop, but producers ultimately rejected him because they worried his massive physique would make the character look ridiculous rather than intimidating. The Austrian bodybuilder turned action star was riding high on the success of The Terminator in 1987, which made him an obvious choice for another role involving a character who was part machine and part unstoppable force. Orion Pictures co-founder Mike Medavoy met with Schwarzenegger multiple times to discuss the possibility of him donning the metallic armor and becoming the cyborg police officer Alex Murphy. The studio was genuinely interested in casting him, especially since his mechanical acting style in The Terminator had proven that he could convincingly portray a character with robotic mannerisms and limited emotional range. However, as the costume design process began, a major problem became apparent that would ultimately doom Schwarzenegger's involvement in the project. The special effects team realized that building a RoboCop suit around Arnold's enormous frame would create what they described as a Michelin Man effect, where the character would appear comically bulky and inflated rather than sleek and threatening. His naturally massive shoulders and chest, combined with the additional bulk required for the armor plating and mechanical components, would have made RoboCop look more like a walking refrigerator than a sophisticated piece of law enforcement technology. The producers also discovered that Schwarzenegger's body type was simply incompatible with their vision for how RoboCop should move and appear on screen. They needed an actor with a much leaner, more athletic build who could fit into a form-fitting costume that would emphasize the character's precision and efficiency rather than his raw power. This realization led them to seek out a completely different type of performer, eventually settling on Peter Weller, whose slighter frame allowed the costume designers to create the iconic, streamlined look that made RoboCop appear both futuristic and believable. Fact 3. The infamous "Robo wants Oreos" incident. One of the most bizarre and disputed stories from the RoboCop set involves Peter Weller allegedly demanding cookies while fully dressed in his cyborg costume, creating a standoff that has become legendary among film crew members. According to weapons master Randy Moore, the incident occurred during filming at the steel mill location, when he approached Weller to hand him his weapon for an upcoming scene. Moore was carrying a stack of about 8 Oreo cookies in his other hand, planning to eat them during a break between takes. When Moore tried to give Weller his gun and reminded him that the safety was off, the actor reportedly refused to take the weapon and instead declared that Robo wants an Oreo, while remaining completely in character. Moore found this request absurd and told Weller that robots don't eat cookies, suggesting that if Peter wanted an Oreo, he should ask for one as himself rather than as his character. This response apparently frustrated Weller, who was going through a phase of intense method acting where he insisted everyone on set call him either Murphy or Robo, depending on which aspect of his character was being filmed. According to Moore's account, Weller then clomped across the set in his heavy metallic costume, walked to the edge of a railing, and began shouting down to the crew 3 stories below. "Robo wants an Oreo!" The sound echoed dramatically through the steel mill, causing work to stop as everyone looked up to see what was happening. In an act of defiance, Moore claims he immediately stuffed all 8 Oreos into his mouth at once and ate them in front of Weller, refusing to give in to what he saw as ridiculous behavior. However, Peter Weller himself has completely denied this story ever happened, stating that he has no idea what Moore is talking about and calling the entire tale fabricated. Whether the incident actually occurred or represents an exaggerated version of on-set tensions, it has become one of the most talked about behind-the-scenes stories from the production. Fact 4. Car keys scene took 50 takes. A simple scene that lasts only a few seconds in the final movie became one of the most frustrating and expensive shots to film during the entire RoboCop production, requiring up to 50 takes and consuming an entire day of shooting time. The scene in question shows RoboCop walking out of the police station when a fellow officer casually tosses him a set of car keys, which he catches smoothly in one fluid motion before heading to his patrol vehicle. What audiences see as an effortless display of robotic precision was actually the result of a major design flaw in the RoboCop costume that no one had anticipated during the planning stages. The hands of Peter Weller's suit were constructed from foam rubber rather than a harder material, which meant they had a soft, squishy texture that made gripping objects extremely difficult. Every time the keys were thrown toward Weller, they would simply bounce off his foam rubber gloves and fall to the ground with a disappointing clatter. The crew tried dozens of different approaches to solve this problem, adjusting the angle of the throw, the speed of the toss, and even the timing of Weller's hand movements, but nothing seemed to work consistently. The foam rubber material was too soft to provide the grip needed for such a simple action, and the bulky gloves made it nearly impossible for Weller to close his fingers quickly enough to catch the keys before they bounced away. As the day wore on and the takes multiplied, the production team became increasingly concerned about falling behind schedule and going over budget. This was particularly worrying because the film was already operating on a tight financial plan, and wasting an entire day on what should have been a quick establishing shot was exactly the kind of setback that could jeopardize the entire project. The studio executives at Orion Pictures were reportedly so frustrated by the delays caused by this seemingly simple scene that they briefly considered pulling funding from the production altogether, making this one of the most expensive key-catching scenes in cinema history. Fact 5. Peter Weller sat in underwear for car scenes. Peter Weller never actually sits down fully dressed in his RoboCop costume during any of the car scenes in the movie, because the bulky suit made it physically impossible for him to fit inside a standard police vehicle. Instead, the filmmakers had to create an elaborate workaround that involved Weller wearing only the top portion of his costume while sitting in his underwear from the waist down whenever interior car shots were required. The RoboCop suit was designed to look impressive and intimidating when the character was standing upright or walking, But the costume designers never considered how difficult it would be for the actor to perform basic actions like sitting in a car seat. The rigid armor plating, especially around the hips and thighs, created such bulk that Weller simply could not bend his legs enough to squeeze into the driver's seat or passenger area of any police cruiser used in the production. This practical problem forced the cinematographers and directors to become extremely creative with their camera angles and shot compositions whenever RoboCop needed to interact with vehicles. Most of the car-related scenes focus on showing RoboCop's distinctive metallic boots stepping out of the vehicle or his armored torso emerging from the doorframe, carefully avoiding any shots that would reveal the awkward reality of how he actually traveled from place to place. For the few scenes where audiences needed to see RoboCop sitting inside a car, the production team developed a clever solution that maintained the illusion while accommodating the costume's limitations. Weller would put on just the chest plate, shoulder armor, and helmet of his suit, leaving his legs completely uncovered so he could bend them normally and fit into the car seat. The camera operators would then frame their shots very carefully to show only the upper portion of his body, making it appear as though he was wearing the complete costume, even though he was sitting there in his underwear. This technique worked so well that most viewers never noticed the deception, assuming that RoboCop's impressive suit was just as functional inside vehicles as it appeared to be during his dramatic entrances and exits. Fact 6. Murphy's death scene was never filmed. One of the most important and emotionally devastating scenes in RoboCop was almost never included in the movie because director Paul Verhoeven and producer John Davison ran out of money and wrapped production without filming officer Murphy's brutal death sequence. This scene, where the character of Alex Murphy is gunned down by Clarence Boddicker's gang, serves as the entire foundation for the story since it explains how Murphy becomes transformed into the cyborg law enforcer, yet the filmmakers had to finish shooting without capturing this crucial moment. The production was operating on an extremely tight budget of $12 million, and by the time filming in Dallas was scheduled to end, the money had been completely exhausted. Verhoeven and Davison found themselves in the awkward position of having to tell the studio executives at Orion Pictures that they had successfully completed principal photography for a movie about a dead police officer being brought back to life as a robot, but they had somehow forgotten to actually film the scene where the police officer dies. When the filmmakers returned to Los Angeles and delivered this uncomfortable news to the studio, they expected to face serious consequences for what appeared to be a major oversight in planning and budgeting. However, the executives decided to screen the footage that had been completed before making any decisions about whether to provide additional funding for the missing scene. What they saw completely changed their perspective on the project and convinced them that RoboCop had the potential to be something special. The studio executives were so impressed by the quality of the performances, the innovative special effects, and the overall aesthetic of the completed footage that they immediately approved additional funding to shoot Murphy's death scene. 3 months after the main production had wrapped, Verhoeven assembled his cast and crew in a redecorated warehouse in Los Angeles to film what would become one of the most memorable and disturbing death sequences in science fiction cinema. This last-minute addition proved to be essential to the movie's success, providing the emotional weight and character motivation that transformed RoboCop from a simple action film into a powerful story about loss of humanity and corporate exploitation. Fact 7. Richard Nixon promoted the VHS release. Former President Richard Nixon appeared in television commercials to help promote RoboCop when it was released on home video, earning $25,000 for his endorsement of the ultra-violent science fiction film about a cyborg police officer. This unexpected celebrity endorsement came several years after Nixon had resigned from the presidency in disgrace during a period when he was working to rebuild his public image and supplement his income through various business ventures and media appearances. The decision to hire Nixon as a spokesperson for RoboCop was particularly surprising given that the movie contained extreme violence, harsh language, and satirical commentary about corporate corruption and government incompetence. These themes seemed somewhat at odds with having a former president, especially one with Nixon's controversial background, lending his credibility to the project. However, the home video market in the late 1980s was extremely competitive, and studios were willing to try unconventional marketing approaches to help their releases stand out on crowded video store shelves. Nixon's involvement in promoting RoboCop demonstrated his willingness to take on almost any paid opportunity that could help restore his financial situation and keep him in the public eye following his political downfall. The former president had faced significant legal expenses and lost many of his traditional income sources after leaving office, making him more open to unusual business propositions that other public figures might have declined. What makes this celebrity endorsement even more remarkable is that Nixon chose to donate his entire $25,000 fee to the American Boys Club, a national youth organization dedicated to helping disadvantaged children develop character and leadership skills. This charitable gesture helped transform what could have been seen as a purely mercenary decision into something that benefited young people across the country. The donation also provided Nixon with positive publicity and demonstrated that even his most unconventional business decisions could be used to support worthy causes, showing a more philanthropic side of the former president during his post-political career. Fact 8. Real criminal got caught watching the film. A real criminal who had just committed a robbery made the mistake of hiding in a movie theater showing RoboCop in 1987, only to become so completely absorbed in watching the film that he failed to notice police officers quietly evacuating the entire cinema around him. The robber had ducked into the dark theater as a way to escape from pursuing officers, thinking the crowded venue would provide perfect cover while he waited for the heat to die down and the police search to move elsewhere. What the criminal didn't anticipate was how captivating Paul Verhoeven's science fiction thriller would prove to be, even for someone who was supposedly focused on evading capture. As RoboCop's story of crime, justice, and corporate corruption unfolded on the big screen, the robber found himself getting drawn deeper and deeper into the movie's world of futuristic Detroit and its cyborg police officer. The film's intense action sequences, satirical humor, and compelling characters apparently held his attention so completely that he lost all awareness of what was happening around him in the real world. Meanwhile, the police officers who had been chasing him had figured out where he had gone and quietly surrounded the theater building. Instead of storming in and creating a dangerous situation with innocent moviegoers, the officers worked with theater management to carefully and discreetly clear out all the legitimate customers without causing a panic or alerting the suspect to their presence. This methodical approach took considerable time and coordination, but it allowed them to empty the entire cinema while the robber remained glued to his seat, completely unaware that his hiding place was being systematically dismantled around him. When the movie finally ended and the house lights came up, the criminal suddenly found himself sitting alone in an empty theater, surrounded by police officers who had been patiently waiting for this moment. According to reports from the incident, he was so shocked by the sudden realization of his situation that he offered no resistance when the officers approached to arrest him, apparently still somewhat dazed by both the movie he had just watched and the discovery that his brilliant escape plan had backfired so spectacularly. Fact 9. ED-209's hilarious design inspiration. The intimidating enforcement droid ED-209 was deliberately designed to look like the letter Z and be as completely non-human as possible, serving as the perfect mechanical opposite to RoboCop's more humanoid appearance. Director Paul Verhoeven had very specific ideas about how this corporate killing machine should move and behave, and he sometimes acted out the robot's awkward movements himself during planning sessions to help the design team understand exactly what kind of ungainly, non-organic creature he wanted to create. ED-209 was intended to represent everything that RoboCop was not. While RoboCop retained elements of humanity and could move with grace and purpose, ED-209 was meant to be purely mechanical, clumsy, and utterly without any human characteristics. Verhoeven worked closely with young designer Craig Davies to develop a robot that would look completely unanthropomorphic, meaning it shared no physical similarities with human beings or even human-made objects that people could relate to on an emotional level. The director wanted ED-209 to have the precision of a lathe and the physical force of a Mack truck, but without any of the fluid movement or recognizable proportions that might make audiences sympathize with the machine. This led to the distinctive Z-shaped design, where the robot's head sat at an odd angle on top of a body that jutted forward aggressively, supported by legs that moved in jerky, mechanical steps rather than the smooth gait of a living creature. During the design process, Verhoeven would actually get up from his chair and demonstrate how he wanted ED-209 to walk and turn, acting out the robot's stiff, awkward movements with exaggerated gestures that emphasized its mechanical limitations. These impromptu performances helped the special effects team understand that ED-209 should never move like anything natural or organic, but should instead lumber around like a piece of heavy industrial equipment that had somehow been given the ability to walk. The result was a robot that looked powerful and dangerous, but also fundamentally clumsy and inhuman, exactly the kind of corporate-designed machine that would malfunction spectacularly when faced with something as simple as a flight of stairs. Fact 10. Multiple lawsuits over fake commercials. Several real companies filed lawsuits against the RoboCop production for copyright infringement, claiming that the movie's satirical fake commercials violated their trademarks and business interests. These legal challenges came as a complete surprise to the filmmakers, who had created the mock advertisements as obvious parodies meant to satirize American consumer culture and corporate marketing, never expecting that actual businesses would take offense or claim ownership over similar concepts. The most notable lawsuit came from a company that was actually named Nukem, which claimed that the movie's fictional board game commercial for Nukem infringed on their existing trademark. The real Nukem company argued that the film's satirical advertisement, which promoted a family board game about nuclear warfare with the slogan, "Get them before they get you," was too similar to their business name and could cause confusion among consumers or damage their brand reputation. This legal action created an ironic situation where a company was essentially suing a movie for making fun of the very kind of corporate mentality that the film was trying to criticize. The fake Nukem commercial in RoboCop was designed to highlight the absurdity of turning nuclear annihilation into family entertainment, representing everything that was wrong with a society that could commercialize and trivialize even the most serious threats to human survival. The satirical commercials in RoboCop, which also included advertisements for the Family Heart Center and the gas-guzzling 6000 Sucks automobile, were integral to director Paul Verhoeven's vision of a future dominated by corporate interests and mindless consumerism. These mock ads served as a Greek chorus throughout the film, commenting on the shallow values and misplaced priorities of the society that had created both RoboCop and the problems he was designed to solve. The legal challenges forced the production company to deal with unexpected expenses and complications during what should have been the celebratory period following the film's successful release. Instead of simply enjoying their critical and commercial success, the filmmakers found themselves defending their right to create satirical content that parodied the very corporate culture they were attempting to critique through their science fiction story. Fact 11. The suit nearly killed the movie. The RoboCop costume created such a massive production crisis when it arrived on set that filming came to a complete halt. Peter Weller was temporarily fired from the project, and the entire movie nearly collapsed before a single scene could be shot with the title character. The suit, which was supposed to be the centerpiece of the entire film, simply did not fit Weller's body and was so rigid and unwieldy that he could barely move, let alone perform the precise, fluid movements that director Paul Verhoeven had envisioned for the character. This costume disaster was made even more catastrophic by the fact that it occurred several weeks into production, when normally the suit should have been ready and tested long before filming began. Director Paul Verhoeven had originally insisted on creating a metal costume, which proved to be completely unusable, and the replacement suit arrived so late that there had been no opportunity for proper fitting or rehearsal time with the actor who would have to wear it for most of the movie. When Weller first tried to put on the completed costume, it became immediately apparent that the suit was a disaster waiting to happen. Not only did it not fit his body properly, but the rigid construction made it impossible for him to walk normally, or perform even the most basic movements that the script required. The production team had spent weeks developing elaborate choreography and movement plans for RoboCop, all of which became completely worthless when the suit proved to be unwearable. The situation became so desperate that production was forced to shut down for several days while crews frantically worked to modify the costume, cutting away thick rubber sections around the joints and completely redesigning how the various pieces fit together. During this crisis period, tensions between Weller and Verhoeven reached such a breaking point that the actor was briefly dismissed from the project, only to be rehired when it became clear that starting over with a new lead actor would be even more expensive and time-consuming than fixing the suit problems. Fact 12. Peter Weller's method acting disaster. Peter Weller's attempt at method acting during the first few weeks of RoboCop filming created such hostility on set that it nearly destroyed his working relationships with the director and his fellow actors. Weller insisted that everyone on the production call him either Murphy or Robo, depending on which aspect of his character was being filmed in any particular scene, believing this would help him stay in character and deliver a more authentic performance as the cyborg police officer. This approach immediately backfired when director Paul Verhoeven found the whole concept silly and ridiculous, telling Weller directly that he couldn't bring himself to go along with such an absurd request. Verhoeven had worked with many actors throughout his career and had never encountered someone who demanded that the entire cast and crew participate in their personal acting method, especially one that seemed so disconnected from the practical realities of making a movie on a tight schedule and budget. Miguel Ferrer, who played the ambitious corporate executive Bob Morton, took an even more aggressive approach to showing his displeasure with Weller's demands. Instead of simply refusing to call Weller by his character names, Ferrer actively mocked the entire concept by intentionally and repeatedly addressing Weller by his real name in front of other cast and crew members, making it clear that he found the whole method acting experiment to be pretentious and disruptive to the collaborative atmosphere that movie sets require to function effectively. Kurtwood Smith, who played the villainous crime boss Clarence Boddicker, chose a different but equally pointed way to express his disapproval of Weller's behavior. Rather than confront the issue directly or mock it openly like Ferrer did, Smith simply refused to speak to Weller at all for the first several weeks of production, completely ignoring him during breaks and avoiding any unnecessary interaction that wasn't directly required for their scenes together. This cold shoulder treatment created additional tension on a set that was already dealing with numerous technical challenges and budget constraints, forcing Weller to eventually abandon his method acting approach when it became clear that his fellow actors and the crew had no intention of accommodating his unusual requests. Fact 13. 3 pounds lost per day in suit. Peter Weller lost between 3 and 5 pounds every single day from sweating inside the RoboCop costume during filming in Dallas, Texas, where summer temperatures regularly reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the heavy metallic suit created a personal sauna that nearly caused the actor to collapse from dehydration on multiple occasions. The combination of the brutal Texas heat and the completely enclosed costume made wearing the suit a genuinely dangerous ordeal that required constant medical monitoring and intervention to keep Weller conscious and functioning throughout the long shooting days. The RoboCop suit was constructed from heavy materials including fiberglass and metal components that trapped body heat and prevented any natural cooling through air circulation. When worn for extended periods under the blazing Dallas sun, the interior temperature of the costume could reach over 120 degrees, creating conditions that were comparable to being locked inside a car with the windows rolled up during a heat wave. This extreme environment caused Weller to sweat so profusely that he was literally losing dangerous amounts of body weight through water loss every day. To combat this life-threatening situation, the production team had to implement emergency measures that went far beyond normal film set safety protocols. Weller was required to consume gallons of water and lemonade throughout each filming day, drinking constantly between takes to replace the fluids he was losing at an alarming rate. Eating solid food became nearly impossible because his body was working so hard to regulate its temperature that digestion became extremely difficult and uncomfortable. Eventually, the health risks became so severe that the costume department had to install an actual air conditioning unit inside the RoboCop suit, essentially turning the costume into a wearable refrigeration system. This modification required significant engineering work and added even more weight to an already heavy costume, but it was absolutely necessary to prevent Weller from suffering heat stroke or other serious medical complications. Even with the air conditioning system in place, filming in the Dallas heat remained an endurance test that pushed both the actor and the costume to their absolute limits every single day of production. Fact 14. The script was rejected by every major director. Virtually every major director in Hollywood turned down the opportunity to make RoboCop, dismissing the screenplay as nothing more than a mindless action movie about a robot police officer without recognizing the sophisticated social commentary hidden beneath its surface-level premise. The script by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner had been making the rounds through the industry for months, being passed from one established filmmaker to another, only to be rejected repeatedly by directors who couldn't see past the seemingly simple concept of a cyborg fighting crime in a dystopian future. Most of the directors who read the script apparently saw only the basic plot elements. A murdered cop gets turned into a robot, the robot shoots bad guys, and corporate executives scheme in boardrooms. This straightforward reading led them to conclude that RoboCop was just another low-budget science fiction exploitation film that would appeal only to teenage audiences looking for mindless violence and special effects. The satirical elements that would eventually make the movie a critical success were either completely missed or dismissed as unimportant compared to what they perceived as a derivative and unoriginal story. The repeated rejections created a frustrating situation for the producers, who knew they had something special but couldn't convince any respected filmmakers to take on the project. Each rejection meant starting the search process over again, reaching out to the next tier of directors, and hoping that someone would finally understand the script's potential beyond its action movie framework. This pattern continued for so long that the project began to seem cursed, as if no established director would ever be willing to attach their name to what appeared to be such an obviously commercial and artistically limited venture. The irony of this situation became apparent only after Paul Verhoeven finally accepted the project and transformed it into one of the most intelligent and socially aware science fiction films of the 1980s. All those directors who had passed on RoboCop missed the chance to create a movie that would be praised for its sharp critique of corporate culture, media manipulation, and urban decay, proving that sometimes the most innovative and meaningful projects can be disguised as simple entertainment. Fact 15. Writer's mugshot cameo on wanted poster. Screenwriter Edward Neumeier makes a sneaky cameo appearance in RoboCop by having his photograph placed on a wanted poster that hangs on the bulletin board inside the Detroit police station, complete with his real name and fictional criminal charges that viewers can read if they pause the movie and look closely enough. This hidden Easter egg appears during a scene where RoboCop walks through the police station, and eagle-eyed fans who examine the background details can spot Neumeier's face among the various criminal suspects and missing persons notices that decorate the walls of the precinct. The wanted poster is designed to look completely authentic, featuring Neumeier's actual photograph alongside official-looking text that lists his name and describes the fictional crimes he supposedly committed. According to the detailed information visible on the poster, the screenwriter is wanted for charges of fraud and flight to avoid prosecution, creating an amusing inside joke that suggests the person who wrote the movie is himself a fugitive from justice in the world he created. This self-referential cameo was originally planned to be even more elaborate, as Neumeier was initially supposed to appear in a different scene where a character catches a gun that RoboCop knocks out of a criminal's hand during a nightclub confrontation. However, Neumeier wasn't available during the filming of that particular sequence, so the production team had to find an alternative way to include him in the movie, leading to the creation of the wanted poster gag that ended up being much more subtle and clever than a traditional on-screen appearance. The poster cameo represents the kind of playful attention to detail that makes RoboCop rewarding for viewers who take the time to examine the background elements and production design. Close inspection of the original prop reveals that the bulletin board contains multiple layers of information and visual jokes, with Neumeier's wanted poster being just one of several hidden elements that the filmmakers included to add authenticity and humor to the police station environment, rewarding observant fans who notice these carefully crafted details during repeat viewings.